Last time we spoke about the escalating situation in China involving foreigners and the emerging Yihui boxers. The incident in Li Yuantuan had reached a boiling point between the Yihui and the Christian-backed foreign actors. As hard as the Qing government tried to intermediate, they simply could not stop the boxer movement from growing. Boxers were gathering en masse in Shandong and Zhuli, trying to fight back against what they saw as a foreign enemy. Fight they did, but in the end, the Qing government was forced to stamp down upon the ringleaders behind the multiple boxing groups until peace was finally restored in troublesome Shandong Province. Yet while the boxers went home, as they say, were they truly done? The scramble for China had created a new type of enemy, one not so easily controlled, and soon would make themselves heard loud and clear. This episode is Spirit Boxers and the Battle at Senluo Temple. Welcome back to the Fall and Rise of China podcast. I'm your dutiful host, Craig Watson. But before we begin, I just want to remind you all, this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about the history of Asia? Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on the history of Asia and so much more. So go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel over at YouTube. Please check out my recent episode on the Mukden incident and how it was all Ishiwata's war. Also, if you're looking for some bonus content, why don't you check out my Patreon at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel, where I have exclusive podcasts that my patrons vote upon. Check it out, it would mean a lot to me. And so the struggle over the temple at Li Yuantuan had finally come to an end. Peace was restored. Or was it? China was still being carved up by the great powers. The Christians and missionaries were still running amok. And in 1898, Emperor Guangxu began his 100 days reform. A rising star within the Qing court named Kang Youwei had begun pushing progressive reforms upon the emperor. The self-strengthening movement we talked about a very long time ago had focused on military matters, but lacked governmental and societal reforms. These limitations were showcased horribly with China's defeat during the First Sino-Japanese War, when China was forced yet again to abide by unequal treaties, and now the other great powers were literally tearing her apart. The abysmal situation led to the perfect grounds for individuals like Kang Youwei and Qing politician Liang Qiqiao to advocate for more rather drastic reforms, many of which the emperor agreed to. Kang Youwei sought a blend of the new text Confucianism and Western-inspired modernization. In some ways, it was very akin to the Meiji Restoration. It should be no surprise Kang Youwei sought such a thing, as he had studied in Japan and was an avid reader of Western literature. Kang Youwei wrote to the emperor, "China is confronted with the gravest danger in her history." And his reply was an unprecedented 2.5-hour audience with the emperor. According to an eyewitness, a scholar that was present, the emperor complained to Kang Youwei that the conservatives in the Qing court were ruining China with inaction. To this, Kang Youwei agreed and kept pressuring the emperor the need for radical change. "You, the emperor, I would ask you to remove yourself from the seclusion in which you live. Come boldly forward." And well, that is just what Emperor Guangxu did. A stream of imperial edicts called for changes to the examination system, to stress practical studies, to reorganize and modernize the military, to establish a bureau for agriculture, industry, and commerce, to translate and print more Western books, to build a modern education system, to change the absolute monarchy to a constitutional monarchy. The list could go on, but I think you get the picture. Think more modern. Between June and September of 1898, he had issued some 40 imperial edicts. This all resulted in a great divide within the Qing court between the reformers and the conservatives. To the conservatives, it was simply heresy to overthrow China's traditional laws and customs. For some, they believed it was all some kind of evil plot concocted by foreign powers as a means of carving up China further. Such was the thinking of Prince Duan. He was basically the leader of the conservatives in the Qing court and a very loyal subject to Empress Dowager Cixi. He suspected the reforms were actually a plot designed by foreign advisors like Timothy Richards and Ito Hirobumi. The speed and radical nature of the ideas scared the hell out of the conservatives. Empress Dowager Cixi at first appearance was acquiescing towards her nephew's reform program. He had turned 27 and was officially in charge, wink wink as they say. Cixi had temporarily retreated to the summer palace under the guise that she was retiring. However, as Guangxu's reforms began to touch on some, let's say, more sensitive topics like the abolition of sinecures, that being positions within the Qing dynasty that provided little work but good salaries, well, she did not really like that. Not to mention the absolute monarchy changing to a constitutional monarchy. She really did not like that. At this point, there are two stories about plots between Guangxu and Cixi. One has it Guangxu acted first. The other has it being Cixi. Regardless, both did plot against each other. Cixi thought the reforms were too drastic, so she plotted to restore her regency via a coup d'etat. Now, either Guangxu just assumed she was going to do this, or someone leaked the plot to him, but he acted swiftly against her. He asked his two greatest reformer allies, Kang Youwei and Tan Sitong, to devise a plan to thwart Cixi. The plan called for arresting Cixi, basically forcing her into house arrest, pretty typical Qing royal family stuff. However, the agent of these plans was terribly chosen. Yuan Shikai, someone, boy oh boy, I have written a lot about on my personal channel, the Pacific War channel to be specific, cough cough. If you want to hear more about Yuan Shikai, check out any of my episodes on Asia during World War I and my Warlord Era series. I assure you, you will not be disappointed. Well, it seems Yuan Shikai was working for both sides, or was legitimately just loyal to Cixi. Guangxu planned to use Yuan Shikai not just to arrest Cixi, but perhaps also to kill the Manchu general named Ronglu, who was currently spearheading the coup d'etat for Cixi. Instead of going over to stop or kill him, Yuan Shikai literally just told Ronglu everything about Guangxu's plot. It is alleged Yuan Shikai took a train on September the 20th of 1898, arriving in Tianjin where he spoke to Ronglu, thus exposing the plot. Ronglu acted swiftly by taking an army into the Forbidden City at dawn on September the 21st and placed Emperor Guangxu under house arrest. Eunuchs literally burst into the emperor's room as he was imprisoned on an island known as the Ocean Terrace. And before you think this is a very distant place, it was actually an island in a lake near the west wall of the Forbidden City. For all of this, Yuan Shikai was appointed governor of Shandong Province and went on his merry way. Kang Youwei fled into exile, leaving behind some of his closest disciples and allies in Beijing, who would later become known as the Six Martyrs, or also known as the Six Gentlemen of Wushu. Their names were Tan Sitong, Kang Guangren, Lin Shi, Yang Xianxiao, Yang Rui, and Liu Guangji. Why were they called martyrs, you may ask? Well, Cixi had them beheaded on September the 28th at Taixikao in Beijing. It is alleged she did this primarily because a few of them were planning to infiltrate her residence and assassinate her. They also happened to be the most prominent reformers apart from their leader, Kang Youwei, who had managed to flee to Japan. After this, an imperial proclamation was made stating, "The emperor being ill, the Empress Dowager has resumed her regency." Rumors began to spread that Guangxu had been murdered or was going to be executed. The British minister in Beijing, Sir Claude MacDonald, even warned the Qing government that the foreign powers would view Guangxu's execution with, quote, extreme disfavor, and followed this up by sending a French doctor to see if Guangxu was still alive and well. Things looked horrible in Beijing, but it was getting even worse in places like, what do you think, Shandong Province. Shandong had been facing fiscal crisis after fiscal crisis, but with the foreign powers carving up China, things really took a turn for the worse at the end of the 1890s. The Yellow River was flooding. The Second Sino-Japanese War had hit her hard, and the foreigners, particularly Germany, were carving chunks out of her and exploiting them. The Qing government was increasing taxes to pay for all the problems, and the commoners were being hit even harder. In the year of 1898, it looked like Shandong was going to face a prolonged famine. A salt smuggler named Tong Jianqing began leading a band of 400 bandits carrying small red flags around the border areas of Shandong and Guangxu. They stole grain and cattle, not something out of the norm for the area, but their flags bared a slogan stating, "Smash Western Learning." It is alleged the group sought to find the Big Sword Society, but before they did, the Qing forces managed to surround them, killing a few and arresting others. Tong's little insurgency fell, but then in the close-by village of Dangshan, another similar force rose up with flags bearing the slogan, "Couplet about destroying the Catholics." The Qing yet again sent military units to quell the insurrection quickly. Though these little rebel groups were quelled quickly, it seems such bandits were only getting bolder and bolder. Empress Dowager Cixi appointed General Ronglu as the new Minister of War. He was also in charge of reforming the metropolitan armies to keep the peace and quickly formed a new Wuwei Corps. Their official job was to protect Beijing, and they were Western trained and equipped with modern Western weaponry. They would consist of 5 divisions led by some of China's present and future heavy hitters: Ronglu, Nie Xiqiang, Song Qing, Yuan Shukai, and Dong Fuxiang. Dong Fuxiang alongside Ma Anyang, Ma Haiyan, Ma Fulu, and Ma Fuxiang had been brought over from the northwest, leading a force around 10,000 strong. The Muslim troops were nicknamed the Gansu Braves. In July of 1898, as they made their way to the capital, Dong Fuxiang's men attacked some churches in Baoding. Indeed, Dong Fuxiang, unlike his other colleagues, was publicly hostile towards foreigners. Westerners would go on to describe his force as, quote, 10,000 Islamic rabble, a disorderly rabble of 10,000 men, most of whom were Mohammedans. 10,000 Mohammedan cutthroats feared by even the Chinese. Anti-foreign riots sprang up, particularly in Beijing, around the foreign legation quarter. The situation became so serious, foreign diplomats began summoning forces from nearby foreign fleets to help defend the foreign community in Beijing. This only increased the tension, bringing about further incidents in late September and early October of 1898. Soldiers from the brand new United States Marine Corps were called over to help the foreign community in Beijing. By late October, rumors began to circulate the Guangxu army were going to kill all the foreigners in Beijing. On October the 23rd, it was said, "Troops are to act tomorrow when all foreigners in Peking are to be wiped out and the golden age return for China." Dong Fuxiang's men were causing such chaos, Empress Dowager Cixi ordered the Guangxu army to be transferred over to Nanyuan. Dong Fuxiang's forces went over there only to cause more violence towards railway workers near the Marco Polo Bridge, nearly killing 2 British engineers. As described to us by Minister MacDonald's cable to London on October the 28th of 1898. A serious menace to the safety of Europeans is in the presence of some 10,000 soldiers who have come from the province of Gansu and are to be quartered in the hunting park 2 miles south of Peking. A party of these soldiers made a savage assault on 4 Europeans who were last Sunday visiting the railway line at Lukao-Chiao. The foreign ministers will meet this morning to protest against these outrages. I shall see the Yamen today and propose to demand that the force of soldiers shall be removed to another province and that the offenders shall be rigorously dealt with. The very next day, he telegraphed this. The foreign representatives met yesterday and drafted a note to the Yamen demanding that the Gansu troops should be withdrawn at once. The troops in question have not been paid for some months and are in a semi-mutinous state. They have declared their intention to drive all the Europeans out of northern China. and have cut the telegraph wires and destroyed portions of the railway line between Lukaoqiao and Baoqingfu. Some disturbances have been caused by them on the railway to Tianjin, but the line has not been touched, and traffic has not been interrupted. In the city here, all is quiet. The presence of these troops in the immediate vicinity of Peking undoubtedly constitutes a serious danger to all Europeans. The Yamen gave me a promise that the force should be removed, but have not yet carried it into effect. The great powers had had enough of the Guangxu issue and demanded Dong Fuxiang's force be removed from the Beijing area completely, and the Qing acquiesced. Then in early 1899, the violence shifted from the Beijing area to the foreign concessions. In February, Russian troops killed 47 and injured 51 Chinese over a tax dispute in the Liaodong Peninsula. The following month, the Germans launched a punitive expedition into southeastern Shandong Province. In April, the British killed several Chinese during some disputes around Hong Kong. And Italy, again trying to join the scramble for China, began demanding rights to Samanwan Island off the coast of Yusang. Italy went as far as to dispatch some warships to threaten the Qing, but Shandong troops put up a defense of the islands, so Italy was unable to do so. And Italy got wrecked again. Sorry, Italian listeners. On May the 28th, Robert Hart wrote this back to London from Beijing. I have been worried, I can't tell you how much, by the troubles of China. British doings at Kowloon have been very aggravating. Russian demands for the Peking Railway have been the thunderbolt. German action and military movements in Shandong have outraged the people, and everywhere there is a feeling of unease spreading. There are a lot of rowdies among every 1,000 men, and proof that their own government is weak, as shown by the inroads of foreigners, which will encourage their natural rowdyism. While instead of seeing superior civilization in the foreigner, they will regard him as simply another rowdy and a chip in for their own share of what disorder can wring from the weakness. Some Chinese say that revolt and disorder are fast coming on, that the rioters will wipe out every foreigner they come across, that regardless of the consequences, every province will follow suit, and such anarchy and bloodshed follow that for years and years. Industry and commerce will all disappear. How will that suit the West? After the Juya incident, the number of churches and converts in Shandong increased, and with it more conflicts flared up. In late 1898 to early 1899, anti-Christian incidents spread like wildfire from east to western Shandong. Our old friend George Stens got embroiled in a new incident in the market town of Jiezhou in November of 1898. Stens had allegedly called in German troops to stop some charges placed upon his converts, and this led to a mob rising up against him. Simultaneously, in the nearby villages along the Ruijiao-Juzhou border, American Presbyterians were attacked. Apparently, both incidents may have been linked to an emerging rumor that Empress Dowager Cixi was calling for an expulsion of the foreigners and their Christian converts. This rumor was false. In fact, she had made imperial edicts to protect missionaries. But such rumors simply represented the feelings of the time, and attacks upon Christians increased in places like Quzhou, Yishui, and Lanshan throughout November and December. George Stens was kidnapped by a mob, and the German forces hurried to his rescue, demanding reparations for his kidnapping. Another incident occurred, prompting Berlin to order 2 units to dispatch from Qingdao, who went on a punitive expedition, seeing 39 houses burnt down in Lanshan. Another unit was led personally by Stens to the city of Wujiao, where the Germans demanded a payment settlement for all the incidents before they all returned to Qingdao in late May. All of these actions were quite an escalation. While the foreign powers definitely were already using gunboat diplomacy in the 1890s, typically when they tried to influence anything, they would do so indirectly, through the Qing, for example. But now, more and more, they were physically barging into the country and using force themselves. On April the 11th of 1899, Yusang received the governorship of Shandong, and his immediate problem to fix was controlling the foreigners and their Christian allies. Yusang had often been perceived to be conservative and anti-foreign. He was a Manchu of the Yellow Banner and we spoke about how he had quelled the Big Sword Society years prior. He had a reputation as being tough and efficient. When he took the job, he immediately went to work trying to please the Germans so they would back off. But instead, they kept using brute force to quell more and more incidents. Some anti-foreign protests broke out in early July, and the Germans sent troops who killed 13 and injured 8 Chinese. Simultaneously, the Germans began practicing amphibious assaults near Dengzhou, prompting Yusang to believe they intended to seize more territory. Yusang tried to protest in his own ways. He began demanding the Germans show evidence of the incidents and take responsibility for the damage that they did. Yusang sent word to the Zhongli Yamen, demanding he instruct the Chinese minister in Berlin to ask the German commanders in Qingdao to be replaced. Now, while Yusang was battling it out with the Germans, a series of anti-Christian incidents heated up around Rijiao. The cause of these, as told to us by Yusang, was, quote, "The gentry and people everywhere are outraged at the Germans' unprovoked murder and arson." News of foreign encroachment and rumors spread from town to town across Shandong. Then in Jining, an incident took place as a result of Christians abusing locals by taxing and fining banquets, and such. This led to the rise of a new group of boxers who fought back. The Daotai of southern Shandong, Peng Yusun, wrote this of the incident. "These are the source of the rise of the Red Boxers, Hong Quan, and the other boxing groups. The Big Sword Society has long existed in Kaozhou. Because they disliked the name as infelicitous, they changed it to Red Boxer, united in righteousness. Charm Boxing, or Red School. The names multiplied, and they studied boxing techniques. Their methods include promising the gods not to covet children or wealth. They swallow charms and chant spells to be able to resist guns and swords. The main charms with which they dazzle people are very common, wild and heterodox. They say they are protecting themselves and their families, but secretly they certainly seek to feud with the Christians. They spread the practices everywhere, the same in every village, because it is simple and easy to learn. It can rouse the common people as surely as beating a drum." 2 boxer leaders emerged, Xiao Xixuan and Chen Jiaozhu. Xiao Xixuan was from Feng County of Guangxu, and he had ties to the Big Swords. Chen Jiaozhu was a discharged soldier from places like Juyi, a man simply looking to make a living down on his luck, as it were. Now, the incident actually began with groups calling themselves the Big Sword Society, counter-harassing the Christians in Jining. The German missionaries began to send word back over to Beijing, and Yusang's attention was demanded. Yusang began to demand evidence of the ongoings in Jining, and even pointed out that the Christians had been abusing the local population. But then in July, the Red Boxers emerged under Xiao and Chen, and they were countered by Qing militias. Yusang personally toured the area and reported back to Beijing his belief that the Christians had forced the boxers to defend themselves. To Yusang, as long as the boxers confined themselves to self-defense, acted only as a counterweight to the Christian abuses, well, he was fully willing to tolerate them. He wrote this to a colleague in September. "In my area, we have already checked accurately. All peaceful boxing for self-defense we do not prohibit. But if they kidnap for ransom and loot, then we send troops to seek them out and arrest them." And thus he reported back to Beijing that he had arrested some wrongdoers, executed the Red Boxer leader, Chen Jiaozhu, and such. Thus when the boxers got out of hand, Yusang seemed willing to put down the hammer, so to speak. However, Yusang was between a rock and a hard place. He was trying to keep the foreigners accountable for their actions while simultaneously doing the same with the boxers, but this was obviously impossible in practice. As the boxers got more and more bold, Yusang urged them to disperse, advised them to instead join militias to just keep their heads out of trouble. The Big Sword Society even re-emerged around Kaozhou, harassing Christians along the border with Zhuli province. Yusang was quite lenient against them as well. Now, Yusang at this point was dealing with the Red Boxers, who were predominantly found in southern Shandong. But another group known as the spirit boxers emerged in the northwest. They were operating outside the German sphere of influence. This was the realm of French, Italian, and some American missionaries. The spirit boxers were significantly different from their southern comrades, as they had distinct invulnerability rituals involving being possessed by gods. By early 1899, they were taking on an anti-Christian nature, and then they suddenly adopted the name Boxers United in Righteousness, the Yihe Quan. They recruited and trained openly in villages. They were an extremely visible organization. Their rituals and gods derived from popular literature and opera. They became extremely popular and fast. These were the true boxers that would become known to the entire world. The spirit boxers began with no anti-Christian dimension. The original slogan, for example, was 孝敬父母，和睦家乡. Respect your parents, live in harmony with your neighbors. They were interested in helping local communities, often providing healing services. They were distinct in the fact they did everything out in the open, unlike other groups like the Big Sword Society who kept their invulnerability techniques a secret. They did not take fees, unlike the Big Swords. Thus, they were often seen as the poor cousins to the Big Swords. Their form of invulnerability involved spirit possession, which is a large reason they came into conflict with the Christians. Henry Porter noted about this in the Qiping area. They added a new element which had caused the rapid spreading of the assemblies. The emissaries who went about to stir up the interest of people pretended to be possessed of a demon. They add a kind of spiritism to their gymnastics. They suppose that their trainer is a medicine man. The fellows, mostly young men, practice under him and fancy themselves under the influence of a spirit. In this condition, they pretend that nothing can harm or injure them. Now, at some point in late 1898, the spirit boxers transformed. The Christian abuse in the area led them to join forces with the Big Sword Society. This, of course, coincided with poverty, natural disasters, famine, all the usual suspects. People needed food and hope. A boxer leader emerged named Zhu Hongdeng. He was born in southern Shandong to a poor, landless family. He sold peanuts and was often forced to beg to make ends meet. He learned spirit boxing in Changqing and went from village to village teaching it. He was one of the main leaders who influenced the spirit boxers early on to take on invulnerability techniques. Now in 1899, Yusang was still acting as a moderate between the foreigners and the boxers. As long as the boxers did not go too overboard, he turned a blind eye. His policy towards the Christian boxer conflict was to stay as even-handed as possible. But in late spring of 1899, the magistrate of Qiping seemed to be openly supporting the boxers. According to one account, Magistrate Yu even went to watch the opera and praised the spirit boxers. At that time, the spirit boxers were at their height. They went to every village. Magistrate Yu even gave awards to the spirit boxers. In the Qiping area, it looked like the Qing officials were beginning to tilt against the Christians and were becoming more and more ineffective at quelling the violence. As the boxers spread through Shandong and across the border into Zhuli province, more and more conflicts with Christians flared up. In May of 1899, the county of Pingyuan began to see complaints from Christians about boxers. A local boxer leader named Guangxu from the village of Baidi was quite a hothead, as they say. He ruled his village with an iron fist, and he was openly harassing the Christians. Now, Yusang at this point did not see much of a difference between the red boxers of the south and the spirit boxers of the northwest. So, when reports came to him of incidents, he thought it was easily solvable stuff. The Christians pressed their missionary allies, who complained to the Zhongliyamen, but no real efforts ever came about to quell the problems. Then a Christian Chinese leader in Pingyuan County was robbed by some boxers, including Jiang Xue. The man died apparently of frustration and stress, and his son accused the boxers of killing him. The local magistrate investigated the situation, but found no wounds on the 80-year-old man, so he took no real action other than asking Jiang Xue and the other boxers to return the stolen property. The Zhonglian men began harassing Yusang, who proceeded to harass the local magistrate, but the conflict was not thoroughly being looked at. In fact, the local magistrate was downplaying the entire thing and failing to even mention the boxer element to any of it. The conflict got bigger, the Christians kept complaining, but nothing was being done. In Guangxu Lijiang, a southern part of Pingyuan County, a boxer leader named Li Changshui was quarreling with a Christian leader named Li Qinbang. They had a minor land dispute, and Li Changshui began looting Li Qinbang with some of his boxer allies. The local magistrate ordered Qing forces to crack down, and they stormed the area, arresting some of the boxers, but Li Changshui fled. The magistrate reported to Yusang that everything was well and done. However, Li Changshui had fled to Qiping, where he asked for help from Zhu Hongdeng. Both men returned to Guangxu Lijiang with a force of hundreds of boxers. The boxers forced the local Christians to feed them, took some hostage for ransom to get some of their arrested boxer allies out of jail. The magistrate came to investigate to find Zhu Hongdeng dressed in red pants, a red cap, with red flags carrying the slogan, 吞家, 以和吞, 西清miang. Under heaven, the boxers united in righteousness revive the Qing and destroy the foreign. The magistrate soldiers charged into the village, and the boxers attacked their flag bearers. Upon seeing this, rumor has it the magistrate said to his chief runner, "Which is faster, a horse or a sedan chair?" He said this before fleeing the scene. The boxers had thus defeated a rather tiny Qing force, literally less than 20 guys. Everybody began harassing the magistrate to summon an adequate force before Zhu Hongdeng got emboldened enough to start a full-blown rebellion. On October the 12th, the magistrate requested forces, and by the 16th, they arrived, led by the prefect of Jinan, Liu Changying, and officer Yuan Qidun, a cousin of Yuan Shikai. Liu Changyi quickly seized command and went to Guangxu Lijiang only to find Zhu Hongdeng and the boxers had left. They had fled northwest to the Senluo Temple, which was on the eastern bank of the Majia River. The temple was built over a dike and had a commanding view with its high walls. On the morning of October the 18th, around 1,500 boxers had gathered around the temple. Yuan Xidun dispatched 500 infantry with 20 cavalry towards them. His scouts went ahead and reported back that the boxers had these large red flags reading, "Revive the Qing, destroy the foreign." A boxer messenger came out to greet the scouts, and apparently miscommunication led to some gunfire from the Qing. The boxers were armed with swords, spears, and just a handful of primitive hunting rifles, and some antique cannons that they erupted against the Qing. The Qing forces carried only single-shot rifles, and after firing their first volley, they could not reload quickly enough as the boxers charged upon them. A few Qing soldiers were killed, more were wounded as they fled for their lives. The Qing soldiers were shocked by the ferocity of the boxers. They charged without fear of death or pain. The Qing rallied for a counterattack, and this time they caused casualties upon the boxers, killing roughly 27 men. Zhu Hongdeng and the boxers fled as the Qing arrested and executed many. While this could appear to the naked eye as a minor skirmish, it was a watershed moment for the boxer movement. The boxers had been brought to the forefront of Qing attention. They received a ton of publicity for this. Zhu Hongdeng, though defeated in the end, paraded around Qiping stating that they had won a great victory. The slogan, "Revive the Qing, destroy the foreign," was an incredible new development. But why? Because the one thing the boxers had always lacked was good leadership. They were pretty much directionless this entire time. Zhu Hongdeng would be arrested like countless other boxer leaders, but a slogan, "Revive the Qing, destroy the foreign," this was something people could rally to, and it was a sense of direction. The slogan spread like wildfire amongst many differing boxer groups. Also, they were using the term Yihe Tuan instead of Yihe Quan, Tuan meaning militia, Chuan referring to the boxers. They were now the militia united in righteousness. They had evolved into a more legitimate force. As Dan Carlin once said in his podcast about the events leading up to World War I, the pin had been taken out of the hand grenade. I would like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that you are still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel over at YouTube. And if I can make a recommendation, check out my episode on the Mukden incident of 1931. Also, over at my Patreon, found at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War channel, if you'd like to hear some more specialized podcasts, join my Patreon and vote on the exclusive podcasts I put out every month. And it doesn't have to be about Chinese history or the Pacific War. I'll cover just about anything. Check it out, it means a lot to me. The Yihe Chuan had become the Yihe Tuan. The conflicts against the foreigners reached its zenith, and now the Boxers were going to lead a violent movement that would yet again bring China into a war. But not one with one or two nations, but 8.